this week's episode of the Human Enhancement Podcast. This is your host, Jeffrey Wu, and I'm really excited to have our guest today. His name is Tom Bilyeu, and you've probably eaten his bars before. So he's a co-founder of Quest Nutrition, and he's also the co-founder CEO of Impact Theory, incubator slash content platform that I'm excited to explore more about. I think we have an interesting alliance around the topics that we're interested in exploring. So we're excited to have this conversation.
Really excited to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So Quest bars. I remember growing up as a kid, and I guess in a big scale of things, a relatively recent company. I guess it was founded in 2010, but I remember eating power bars and some of these other competitors, as a kid, and then suddenly it just became Quest bars. I'm just curious to rewind and start from there, perhaps as a way to kick out the conversation. It sounds like you guys have built something that is really sort of the definition now of what I would say is a nutrition product with Quest. What was their journey there?
One, it's pretty cool the way that it didn't exist and then it came out of nowhere, or at least that's certainly what it seemed like to everybody else. To us, it was a lot of hard work that went into making it happen, but it really was about creating something that didn't exist, and we wanted to have a 0 to 1 moment, as Peter Thiel calls it, where we went into a crowded category, but we said, what hasn't anybody done before? And nobody had really made a bar that tasted like it had sugar, but didn't.
Right.
And that became our calling card. And unbeknownst to us as to why nobody had done it, it was because the equipment that allowed you to manufacture a bar that didn't have a liquid sugar in it didn't exist. And so we had to go about engineering our own equipment, really rethinking the entire process and doing things very differently. And that allowed us to get a pretty big jump on the competition, and was how we were able to take the space by storm, even though people thought we were crazy when we went into it because there was so much competition and the category had been declining for years. And so to come in and do that, you really have to do something completely new. And so not only was the product new, not only was our process new, but the way that we were marketing was new. And so we were using social media before that was really a thing for businesses. In fact, in 2009, when we first started conceptualizing the company, everyone was debating whether social media was just a huge distraction. And then, quite frankly, nobody was calling it social media. It was just Facebook.
Yeah.
And so really rethinking how that could be used to build community ended up being a really big win for us.
Yeah, no, I think that was interesting was that you guys were definitely ahead of the curve around like the ketogenic diet, low carb. I mean, now especially in Silicon Valley where we're based in San Francisco, every third person is experimenting with a ketogenic diet or low carb diet. And, 7-10 years ago, it was definitely at the peak of like the low fat craze perhaps, and it was just interesting. Well, I mean, I think you just look at the pattern of like Atkins diet versus Whole Foods diets. I mean, you see cycles in nutrition, but it seems that more and more data today suggests that there is an interesting underlying change or understanding of nutrition science around ketogenic friendly or low carb friendly diet. So I'm just curious, like from your perspective, it would probably did seem insane that a nutrition bar or protein bar category is crowded. But I think, from a different lens, you also just created a new category in some ways, right? Like a very low net carb product.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll differentiate between low carb, which I feel like was really understood in the bodybuilding circle, and that's where we went out, and we happened to hit it right where we were ahead of the trend as it was moving into mainstream consciousness. So that the timing there was just exquisite. It really worked out for us, and I wish I could say that we did that on purpose. The truth is, we were just trying to make a bar that we wanted to eat, and then so that's low carb. A lot of mind share around that as we were coming into the space, and that's why we were able to ride that wave. But then ketogenics, on the other hand, when we started the company, we didn't know about ketogenics. We weren't fat guys. In fact, speaking for myself, I was very much a low fat guy. So I was low carb, low fat, which means I basically
just ate protein.
Super high protein, exactly. basically living in a state of rabbit starvation, if you've ever heard that phrase before, where trappers in the winter would be eating, but the rabbit that they were catching was so lean they'd actually starve to death,
Huh.
which is pretty weird because you think, how am I starving? I'm eating,
Right.
but you're not getting the fat that your body needs in order to have cellular integrity. And so it's like, it becomes literally a death sentence. And I was like always walking this really fine line because I thought fat was going to make me fat, like pretty much everybody else. And it really wasn't until these two guys, one of who both really have just become synonymous with ketogenics, and that's Dominic D'Agostino
Yep.
and Peter Attia, came into the office and had a sit down with my partner who was in charge of the nutrition side of the business. And I come in later and he's like, we're a high fat company now. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, this is crazy. And he's like, no, it's really interesting. We've got to research and learn about this. And so we did end up getting into ketogenics much earlier than other people. But, you know, I spent a lot of years of my life avoiding fat, much to my dismay.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that interesting? Like, I guess, like, from your perspective, seeing and perhaps, like, I think really just, I think pushing the low carb story. I mean, does this feel different than like any other diet fad? I mean, I think we get questions here. Oh, is ketogenic diet, is that just another fad? Is this like an Atkins diet? Is this like the juice cleanse? Or, you know what I mean? I think it's like, yes, you could look at historical past and see there's like this different waves. You know, obviously from our perspective, looking deep into the science, it seems that there's a fundamental understanding that's different than, you know, a fad cleanse or a fad diet. I'm curious from your perspective as someone who's like, you know, gone through and seen a couple of these fads. You know, what is there a distinction? Do you think there's a distinction?
Well, so it really comes down to how you define fad, because I think from a sales perspective, I think ketogenics is going to be a fad. And I think it's going to go through a pretty fascinating cycle where right now we're like on this uptick, huge hype. I think a lot of money is going to be made in moving early on ketogenics. And then I think like the low carb craze, I think it's going to crater out. And then the reason it's going to crater out, by the way, is people are going to get fat doing it. And the reason they're going to get fat is ketogenics is about what you don't eat as much as what you do eat. And so I think people don't understand that. And we joked at Quest about creating a shirt that says ketogenics, you're doing it wrong. And, you know, because we did it wrong, right? Like as you learn about this, like you don't even really understand it. And so you're making it additive. So you're adding fat to your diet rather than adding fat and stripping away carbohydrate and protein. And that's where people get really confused, is they don't understand that a ketogenic diet has moderate, to say the least, or adequate protein. And that's a really important part because of gluconeogenesis. If you're still a sugar burner, if you're still burning glucose and you dump a bunch of fat into the system, then chances are that you won't see the benefits because you won't go into ketosis, A, and B, if you're not in ketosis, then you're not metabolizing the fat and you're probably not getting the fat loss that you wanted.
Right.
So
It's
like, right. It's very tricky. Now, I think in the long run, ketogenics wins because it's real. And so you're talking about that there seems to be some underlying science. And I would say definitively there's underlying science. And when people do it right, when they do virtually no carbohydrate, moderate levels of protein, and then high fat, if they get into ketosis, then your relationship to hunger changes. And that I think is one of the biggest wins. Forget all the knock-on health consequences, which I think are very positive to a ketogenic diet. Forget about the potential implications with anti-cancer benefits and all of that stuff. Even forget just the anti-inflammatory properties, which I can say changed my life. Forget all of that. The way that it changes your hunger is so amazing. It becomes much easier to eat a lower calorie diet, which then allows you to burn fat without the cognitive decline. So because of that, I think you're going to see this trend over time where ketogenics really takes off, but I think that's like a 10-year horizon. So anybody that can survive the inevitable
like the spike and crash of any hype cycle.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think you bring up a good point around like you're probably doing a ketogenic diet wrong. I mean, unless because I think just even in our office, we have people that, you know, ate keto and we're like, hey, let's test your blood ketone levels. Let's finger prick you. And then it's like, hey, your blood is like 0.5 millimole ketones. It's like, you're likely doing it not that well. Right. And I think it is like And then you ask people what they eat. They're like, oh, I eat a lot of meats or pork shoulder or something. And it's like, it is kind of a fattier protein, but you're still eating a lot of protein. And I think to properly do it, yes. I mean, I'm curious, like, what were you eating, and were you measuring, like, how rigorous were you measuring it to make sure you're doing it properly? Like, what was your
Yeah.
personal journey into the ketogenic diet?
My personal journey was pretty weird. I don't recommend that people do it the way that I did it. So the way that a ketogenic diet was introduced to me is as anti-cancer. And so I was like, whoa, anything, even if this ends up not being true, like I just want to try it.
Right.
The potential upside is so massive that, let me give this a shot. And so I went into a therapeutic protocol where I was eating 4-to-1. So I don't know how much you talk about ketogenics in the podcast, but for anybody that doesn't know, so for every combined gram of protein and carbohydrate, I was eating 4 grams of fat. So if I ate half a gram of a carb and half a gram of protein, I'm eating 4 grams of fat. I mean, it's crazy. It was so miserable. And I had what they call keto flu. So I felt terrible because I didn't know how to supplement properly. It was just an absolute nightmare.
I mean, 80%
But
fat from diet. I mean, like, were you eating sticks of butter, oil? I
it
mean, what were you doing
close.
to like hit
A
that?
lot of oil, olive oil, coconut oil, butter, um, and then also, so on top of all of that, so your meals obviously are ridiculously small. I was suppressing the life out of my calories. So I was eating about 1,000 to 1,200 calories a
Ooh,
day.
okay.
Because in a therapeutic protocol, at least the one that I was doing, you need a certain ratio between your ketones, which I was trying to keep above 3, and your blood glucose. So to get that ratio, which now, because this was years ago, but I don't remember the exact ratio anymore, but it was like, it was crazy. I felt so gross. And I was just starving to death. So everyone was like, oh, it changes your relationship to hunger. It's amazing. I was like, lies. Like, this is horrible and hateful in every conceivable way. But there was one thing that was so noticeable that it really gave me hope. And that was, I had struggled with inflammation problems for 15 years. For 15 years, I couldn't play video games, which I love, by the way. I could not play video games. I had to ice my wrists every night
Wow.
just to be able to continue to work out in the gym.
Really?
It was crazy. I couldn't press heavy, nothing. It was an absolute nightmare. And in about 3 days on a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, my wrist felt perfect. And it was so noticeable. I was like, this is a drug-like effect. I feel like I'm taking some sort of anti-inflammatory medication. It was that rapid and that profound. So I was like, hey, there's something here. But I stuck to the anti-cancer therapeutic protocol for like 3 weeks, started with a 72-hour water-only fast. So, I mean, there was just so much emotional misery tied up in it that I didn't go ketogenic properly for like another year. So after that, but I stayed high fat. And I was like, wow, this is really, even though now I'm just high fat, I'm not actually in a ketogenic state as measured with my blood. I still thought, okay, high fat is transformative. It's totally changed my life. So then a year later, everyone was heckling me at Quest, and they're like, dude, you just did it wrong. Like, you don't need to be 4-to-1, go 2-to-1, like, try it. And so after, we started developing our own stuff, I thought, all right, I really need to try this again, and started doing 2-to-1 ketogenic. And I did that for 9 months because it felt so good cognitively, anti-inflammatory. My relationship to hunger really did change. It was just incredible, but I was losing muscle mass. And so finally I was like, okay, I need to do something different. This feels good, but my muscles don't feel good. And so I started cycling. So I'd go ketogenic for a week, then high protein, back and forth,
Yeah.
back and forth. And that's been my journey.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I feel like I think periodization seems to be more and more, in our experience, to be sort of like the best of both worlds, right? Like, a ketogenic diet is good for certain things, but in terms of, like anaerobic heavy lifting, building, high amounts of lean muscle tissue, maybe not necessarily optimal, because you want insulin, you want carbs to be repleting and building muscle mass. So I think that tends to be where a lot of people end up landing, where you start off going super hard in the keto, and then you start seeing really good results, and then as sort of the initial gains attenuate out, it's like, okay, what is a sustainable thing I can do, for the rest of my life? And I think for myself, I do a lot of intermittent fasting, so I'll do 24 or 36-hour fast. I'm curious, like, a lot of people that eat keto have experimented with fasting as well. I mean, you mentioned doing a 72-hour water fast. I mean, do you typically do a lot of fasts, incorporate that into your daily schedule or weekly schedule, or is that something that you just do on and off?
So I do at least once a year. I do a 72-hour water only fast,
Okay.
and then not every time I go into a keto cycle do I do intermittent fasting, but most.
Okay.
And so I'll do 16 hours typically, sometimes a little bit more. If I'm traveling, there are times where I'll accidentally do a 24-hour fast just because I can't get the right macros. And as you know, like when you're really like, let's say north of 1 or 1.5 ketones, you're just not that hungry.
Yep.
Like it's really manageable. How about that? You may still experience hunger, but you don't experience the cognitive decline. You don't have a loss of energy. So it's like not eating something, if the thing that you would have to eat isn't right, becomes pretty easy. So that has been just a huge, huge win. So I do that quite frequently. And the fat loss when you're doing intermittent fasting is
Yeah,
amazing.
absolutely. I'm curious from your therapeutic ketosis protocol, was that based on, Thomas Siegfried's work? We had him on our podcast. I'm just curious where that protocol come from. So I would say that, Dom D'Agostino, Tom Siegfried are pretty big into the anti-cancer research into ketones. I'm just curious, where did that come from?
At the time, we were definitely way more in tune with Dominic. And since then, so I've never really dove deep on Siegfried, but my partner, who's like way, way, way into this,
Yeah.
he did big time, and they now. So I'm not at Quest on a day-to-day
Right.
basis anymore, but I know that they work with all the guys in the ketogenic world, and they put on a whole conference around. How nutrition can be used therapeutically, and so they've really dove deep and had him come as a speaker and all that. But for me, it was driven by Dominic and the things that he had been saying, and ways that we had been internalizing that ourselves at Quest and trying our own protocols. And we went pretty heavy on the anti-cancer angle with dogs, and we're really
Oh,
looking
right.
at
Like
that
keto
every.
pet, keto pet. Yeah.
Exactly. Keto Pet Sanctuary, and really looking at what the implications were there, which is really intriguing. And then we were beginning to do things with hospitals and cancer patients in humans, which was really, really interesting and directionally really fascinating. And I'm really curious to see how far they take that, and what that looks like in a couple of years, because it's pretty encouraging.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I'm curious. Like, I think, my journey into the ketosis space was essentially from fasting to the diet to now looking at exogenous ketones. I'm curious, as you were, exploring and optimizing your own protocol, did you experiment with ketone salts, ketone esters? Sounds like obviously MCT oils, some of the ketone precursors. Curious about your journeys or experience there as well.
Yeah, we did. So we were doing, or I was supplementing with some exogenous ketones when I was in the therapeutic phase. I hated it. It tastes so nasty. Um, yeah, so that also, I didn't like the way that it made me feel, to be honest, but that may have been just because I was so hardcore. I was 4-to-1 plus taking exogenous ketones, having the keto flu. It was just a
A lot of
horrendous way to go.
variables. Yeah.
All user error. Like, I will be the first to admit this is
Yeah.
all user error. But since then, because I have such an easy time now getting into ketosis nutritionally, I haven't supplemented with exogenous ketones.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think, I think there's a lot of confusion out there in terms of like, can I just replace like endogenous ketosis with exogenous ketones? And it's like, well, no, they're just pretty separate mechanisms. So it's interesting to, yeah. I mean, I think one could theoretically bridge and sort of remove the keto flu or keto adaptation period by having exogenous ketones, but you're doing, completely different metabolic pathways for you're not breaking down your fat to produce ketones. You're eating ketones directly, essentially. Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, obviously, Quest Nutrition was a big part of your professional career, and now you're running Impact Theory, and which seems like be a very innovative, and again, like a very interesting combination of like an incubation platform as well as like a content platform. What was the genesis? What was the thesis behind Impact Theory?
So working at Quest and starting that, it really was a reaction to having been chasing money at that time for nearly a decade, and realizing I was living the cliche of money can't buy happiness. And so I was making more money than I'd ever made. On paper, I was quite wealthy, and I just thought, I'm so unhappy. Like, this is ridiculous. And this was back when we owned a software company. And so we decided that I'm long story short, I went and quit and said, I can't do this anymore. Like this, I'm miserable. I need to go do something that makes me feel alive. And my partners ended up agreeing, and they didn't want to do it anymore either. And so we decided that we were going to sell that company and start something that was all about value creation. It was about building community. It was about just being humanity plus. And so that company, of course, ends up being Quest Nutrition and goes on to just be amazingly successful. And I think largely because we stopped saying what's going to be more profitable, and we started asking what's going to add more value to people's lives. And so that simple reframe just has echoed through my life in a huge way. And I've worked in the inner cities a lot, starting when I was 18 years old and going through Quest and, hiring hundreds and hundreds of people that grew up in the inner cities and seeing how it impacts their way of thinking. I realized if I really wanted to help people at scale, it wasn't enough just to address the pandemic of the body. I had to address the pandemic of the mind. And so trying to get Quest as a brand to be flexible enough to deal with both sides was proving to be very difficult and was clearly going to be a very expensive endeavor. So we had built a studio inside Quest to create all of this content. And I just ended up spinning that out into a standalone company, which is Impact Theory, which is literally my theory on how to impact people at a mindset level in order to help them really achieve what they want to achieve in life. And so I'm a huge believer that there's a symbiotic relationship and just so much connective tissue, if you will. I don't mean that literally, but connective tissue between the brain and the body where there isn't really a separation, right? It's an ecosystem. So if you think of the human as a superorganism that is the microbiota in your gut, it's everything that lives on your skin, it's all of your organs working in conjunction with each other. It's mitochondria. Like too much, we're trying to separate the two, and when people start talking about the mind, they get very woo-woo-y. And so it's like I wanted to really bring the two back together, and so we're creating a lot of content at Impact Theory, and we're working with companies. The company that I'm working with right now is a medical device company, which is fascinating. I have no idea if it's going to end up being real or not, but it's just too interesting not to really explore. It's a company called Modius Health, and they're looking at vestibular stimulation and whether or not that has what seem to be potentially profound implications in terms of fat storage for sure, but I think that it also has pretty big implications with anxiety and depression as well.
Vestibular,
and then,
so in the inner ear.
Yeah, so you can stimulate it right behind the ear. The nerve actually comes just below the surface there, and so you can stimulate it with a non-invasive device. And on paper, it works, and it's just that there's always a huge difference between on paper and in reality. And they did Indiegogo account, and it ended up they were trying to raise $50,000 and they had to turn it off at $1.5 million.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's just crazy, right? So, but it's like when you're talking about fat loss and you're saying, hey, this device that you wear on your head, like it's going to do it for you. So, but they're very realistic, and they told everybody, first of all, we have a money back guarantee because we don't know if this is going to work. Here's what we see on paper. Try it and give us feedback. That's really what we're looking for. And so far, the feedback's really been directionally encouraging. And I think what we're ultimately going to find there is people that are over a certain, and I hate to use BMI, but like I don't know if it's going to break it just overweight or if it's going to break it obesity, like where that is. But like for me, marginal difference, I would say to like I'm in the placebo range. So I use it, but I don't actually know if it's doing anything for me. We have other people that are overweight to morbidly obese, and they're noticing pretty big swings positively, which is incredible. Right. So just trying to get enough data to see if that's real. But so now combine that with, if you ask me what's the stated mission of Impact Theory, the answer is to pull people out of the matrix, to build a traditional content studio that rivals Disney. So we're, into comic books, TV shows, movies, like that's what we're trying to do. Because when I think about real holistic health, it has everything to do with optimizing the body, and it has to do with optimizing the mind. And I think the only way to influence that at scale, on a global scale, is to influence belief system, and the only way to do that is through narrative. So that's why we're doing companies, incubating companies that are, health-focused but then also addressing that belief system through content.
I mean, it's about changing culture. That's what it really. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're defining a new culture, which I think is that's a very ambitious and cool goal and aspirational goal. I mean, I think in some ways, right? Like when we talk about fasting, we talk about that as breaking like the culture of eating 3 meals a day plus snacks plus happy hour, and it's interesting that. You're thinking. So I'm curious from a roadmap there. Obviously, are you doing all of them all at once? Are you just starting with like a podcast and a sort of a web like video series, or are you doing like comic book video or movie productions all at once? I mean, what's the roadmap there?
So this is actually something that we put up on our website. It's a 3-phase approach, and I put it on the website because I wanted 10 years from now, I want people to go, whoa, he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. So it starts with building community. So we're doing a lot of social content. And the reason is if we can build community, then we have negotiating power when we go to traditional Hollywood distribution channels. Because the ultimate goal from a financial standpoint, for sure, and then because of something called self-signaling, the ultimate goal is merchandise. And we only make one type of content. So whether it's social content or whether it's a traditional movie, we want to emulate the Disney model. So Disney's the only studio in history, it's been around since the 1930s, and no one has ever replicated it, where they only tell one kind of story and they just approach it from 1,000 different angles. So if I say to you, hey, I'm going to go see a Paramount movie, or I'm going to go see a Sony movie or Warner Brothers movie, you don't know anything about it. Right. But if I say I'm going to go see a Disney movie, you already know something about it. Yeah. So every piece of content that they make feeds into their brand ethos. That makes the brand itself marketable. So if you have a new movie coming out, the most powerful marketing vehicle is just to say it's a Disney movie. So that's why we're building community. We want to make clear what the ethos is. So if Disney is the most magical place on earth, we want to be the most empowering place on earth. So the social content allows us to make that clear. And then because it just takes a longer time, we're working behind the scenes, in essence, to create intellectual property. We start with comic books because you can make a lot of them for relatively cheap, and it's a traditional path to being made into a TV show or a movie.
Marvel. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I always thought the Disney model was a brilliant business model, right? Like again, like the merchandising, like you have your toys that sell the movie, that sell Disneyland tickets, that sell more toys, and you have like an entire generation of children being sort of incubated or just brought up in this culture around values that sort of Disney was able to sort of be like, yeah, we kind of control people's childhoods, and like everything makes money all in one, and it's like a very interesting virtuous cycle. So that's interesting. That's cool. I mean, yeah, it's like it will be exciting to see the flywheel go, right? Like, I mean, you're on your way, which is cool.
Yes.
I mean, is there a surprise? I mean, this is like, I guess, a second or a third. I mean, I guess a second big venture. I mean, I presume you've done multiple projects in the past before even Quest, right? I mean, was there a big difference from this journey so far versus Quest? I mean, obviously, a little bit, more battle scars, more resources, a better network. Is this time around easier, or is it just completely a new set of challenges because you're just tackling a different space? I mean,
yeah, it's easier because I know more. So my journey is the guys that ended up being my partners at Quest, they originally hired me as a copywriter at their technology company. And they said, look, this is a startup, so don't think of yourself as a copywriter. That's just like your tuition. You can have any role you want. You just have to become the right person for that job. So it was all about learning, getting better, skill acquisition, improvement. And I worked my way up very rapidly in that company. And then, as I was saying earlier, ultimately got so fed up and so frustrated that I was just so unhappy that I went in and quit, but then they felt the same. And so it starts this chain reaction where we start Quest. And so that not only was an amazing battleground because we scaled so rapidly. So I had to go through that evolution of, not existing, making the bars with rolling pins and, handheld knives and sealing them 3 at a time till when I left, we were doing 1.5 million bars a day. So, I mean, it was just like, that growth as a human, as a business leader, as an entrepreneur was just incredible.
It started off with like a kitchen, like you were making these in your kitchen.
Literally.
That's a real hustle story. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, it was cool. We were running the software company by day and then making the bars at night. So it was a nights and weekends hustle, for probably the first I mean, God, if you count the period where we were formulating the bar for almost 2 years.
Was it scary to do your first like contract manufacturer order, or if uh,
Well, we didn't. It was actually way scarier because we had to buy all the equipment. So we tried to contract manufacture it and they couldn't do it. So we had to buy the equipment and do it ourselves. That was like mildly scary, but honestly, we were so excited about what we were doing. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about being afraid of it.
so you were like, all right, we're gonna buy some equipment. We're gonna spend some capex, buy some custom
Yeah,
equipment, and
and
make.
look, that definitely there was a moment there when I remember when my partner first suggested it, he was like, "We're gonna have to manufacture ourselves." I was like, "Get out of here! Like that's crazy." And then it's like, actually, that may be exactly what we have to do. So we got over that hump pretty fast. And so by the time that we were actually spending the capital, it was like, okay, yeah, we're emotionally ready for this, and because we said we're either going to do it right or we're not going to do it at all. And it became very clear to us that every contract manufacturer we spoke to wanted us to change the formulation. So that was the one thing we weren't willing to do. And so that only left either not doing it or coming up with our own
And I think it's
equipment.
probably smart, right? Because then you have a pretty big moat, so no competitors could follow you because no one else is willing to buy their own factory, essentially. I mean, yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
like, I guess to even have it all food safety grade, you really had to like go pretty hard, right? Like, okay, we're gonna get a food safe warehouse. We're gonna do all the NSF, whatever, CGMP requirements. So you got to go through like quite a bit of a planning to even pull the trigger. It's not like, oh, we're gonna buy like a Quest bar maker. Like this is like a 6 month, year long process beyond like the 2 year process to even formulate the thing, right?
Yeah, it was crazy. And that's why we had to start making everything by hand because you've got to rent a kitchen that's already, health certified. Oh man, it really was crazy. And it's one of those where I honestly don't know if I had known how hard it was going to be, would we have still done it?
Right.
But luckily we literally had no idea. So it's like, you just, oh, this step, this step, this step. And then you suddenly realize how, like, I didn't even know all the things you have to do for your GMPs and all of that. Like, or that you have to, because a lot of the equipment that we bought, we had to buy from other countries and then bring in and re-modify it to work on our line, which means now you have to get the equipment certified. And going through that process is a nightmare. So yeah, it was, thankfully I did not know.
But I presume along the time you were basically flipping your handmade artisanal Quest bars like pretty quickly. So I guess it sounded like you started with the bodybuilding community and it was just like moving like hotcakes. So like I guess from that experience, you guys had a lot of confidence that hey, this is something that is pretty unique here that people want. And
Yeah,
it was just
we
like
definitely
one step at a
tested.
time. So it's like a left step,
Exactly.
left foot, right foot, and you just kept moving 20,000 steps ahead, and then you have this $1 billion plus revenue company.
Exactly.
Going before flipping the topic, there you were talking about how uh, scaling as a entrepreneur, as a business leader, the first time around, how is that informing your second, I guess, go around the rodeo with impact theory?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're not learning from your past mistakes, then you just handicapping yourself so atrociously. So going through that and building something so big, and all the lessons that you learn, and all the things that you try that worked, and all the things you try that didn't work, and if you've got no ego about that, and you're really just looking at the data and saying, okay, what was a win, what was a loss, why was it a loss, how could I adapt, not make that mistake again? So I'm bringing now all of that in. So even though it applies to a different industry, it's like so much of this stuff is universal, man. And that's one thing that I've really learned in doing the interview show. And I'm sure you get the same feeling. It's like you hear people in all these disparate industries saying the same things over and over and over. And that's been incredibly fascinating to do Impact Theory, the show, and find out like, okay, all these successful people, they've gone through the same thing that I've gone through. They've learned a lot of the same lessons. They're using different words, but at the end of the day, there's universal principles to success. There's just an effective way to think, and it almost doesn't matter who you're talking to, whether it's Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or somebody like myself. It's like we're all saying the same thing, even though those guys, holy hell, like what they've done it's pure insanity. But it's like same principles just carried out, on a even bigger scale.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I think that's true. I think it's like everyone has their own slice of their intuition. I mean, it's like different experience sets, but I think there's some fundamental truth that we're all learning on this journey. Like, yes, like if you're building rockets or you're building a shoe distribution business or you're building a nutrition bar business, like there's different like visceral feelings around like the specific tactical problem. But yes, there is some like strategic, deeper truth behind like, the work ethic and the strategy and talking to customers and all also the basic fundamentals. But I think that one thing that I've always felt is that you can read like the blog post, you can listen to, someone like yourself, but you don't like intuitively like feel the pain of what you had to go through to like really internalize that lesson. I mean, do you feel that? Yeah, what do you think about that? Like, can you teach and can you transmit those lessons 100% fidelity? Like, clearly you can't, but like perhaps you can inspire at the very least and give some sort of roadmap.
You're right. I don't think you can do it with 100% fidelity by any stretch of the imagination. And they say a fool never learns, a smart man learns from his mistakes, and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. It's tough to be wise. Like, it's tough to really read a book or listen to a podcast and be like, okay, I got it. I won't make that mistake. But if you're going through it, it's invaluable to hear how other people have solved the problem. It's also invaluable to hear how people think. And so I'm writing a book right now, and it is literally about how to think. So don't worry about like the specifics of your industry. Just here's the belief system that I built that took me from scrounging in my couch cushions to find enough change to put gas in my car in my 20s, which is a true story, to building a billion-dollar business, to having the kind of financial success that I'd always dreamed of. It's like it all came down to things that I was doing to my mind far more than anything that I was learning specifically tactics wise on any given business.
Right. I mean, that's interesting. Like the mind game itself. I mean, how was that personal journey? Like, I guess you'll be covering in your book, but are there some top one or two things that really helped you build your mind game around like the confidence and your ability to be like a growth mindset, right? Like, 'cause I think a lot of people just think, hey, this is what I have and this is what I can do, and that's my limit. Where I think it sounds like very much from what you preach and what you talk about, it's you have no limits. One should not set their own limit. Let like the rest of the world stop you.
Yeah, man, I so agree with that. And I think that the growth mindset is certainly my primary driver. To give you a couple things that have been just wildly transformative for me, what you build your self-esteem around matters. That's probably, it was a lightning rod moment for me where I realized I was arguing for an idea that I knew was wrong just because it was mine. And so I thought, okay, hold on a second. Like, what do I want here? Because at the time, all I was doing was chasing money. And so I was like, do I want to be rich, which is what I tell myself and everybody else, or do I want to be right? Because I'm acting like I just want to be right. And so I realized that being right would make me feel good about myself, which is actually really important. People need to feel good about themselves. And ego is good. Pride is good. Self-esteem is good if you build it around the right thing. But if you build it around something like being smart, being talented, being right, it's going to be corrosive. You're going to piss other people off. You're going to turn people off. You're not going to have the open mind that you need to actually get better. But if you can flip it and take the identity, take the pride, take the self-esteem of being the learner, right? Being willing to admit that you're wrong, going all in on figuring out what's actually working, being data-driven, always being willing to change your mind. Even when 30 seconds before you were arguing really hard for something, once you realize, oh wait, that this person is actually saying something that's more likely to take us towards our goal. And so now I'm totally on that team. Yep, I get it. I understand it. And now I'll go be the energy for that idea. So once I flipped my self-esteem to being built around being the learner, that was just wildly, wildly transformative for me. And then just always be reading. So reading is really the foundation of my success. And to your point, I'm not getting it 100% high fidelity for sure, but it gives me context. It's helped me build the way that I think. It's helped me build that belief system that really guides everything for me. So those are two like just huge things in my life.
What are you reading right now? I mean, I think that's the reading point is interesting because I think, again, like how do you learn from other people, learn from other people's mistakes? And I think one thing that always struck me was that everyone kind of reads the same crap on social media. But then if it's like inputs into the brain, then you have similar outputs, right? If we're all ingesting the same types of, breaking news, CNBC, Trump does this, Trump does that, or whatever happens, then we have the same kind of outputs that are generated. So if you just read from different sources, from texts that have stood the test of time, or texts that are just interesting, or sci-fi novels or something that just like piques other aspects of your brain, one could, my theory there is like maybe you have like just better ideas because you have better or just different inputs than everyone else. So I'm like, how do you get your source of, or where do you get inspired to read? What are you reading now? How selective are you with your inputs into your brain?
I'm selective but never slow. So, for instance, if I like, oh man, what should I read next? I would sooner read something that isn't perfect than to not read. But I listen to people's recommendations, especially people that I trust. So I'm always asking people like you, what are they reading? What I'm reading right now, I'm going on two paths. So one, my wife is struggling with microbiome issues. So the last 2+ years of our life has been about learning about the microbiome and trying to overcome that. I tried to work with doctors. It just was not working out. So finally I said, you know what? Forget this. I'm going to become an expert in the field myself. And so have really now gone deep and just really, really educating myself on the microbiome and what that's about. So I'm reading books along those lines. We're starting a new show called Health Theory, which is to bring on some of these people that I'm reading about the microbiome from that I think are just extraordinary thinkers look, I'm preaching to the choir here, but like this is about to be the next big wave, is people are going to realize that from antibiotics to our diets over the last like 70 years, we've been making catastrophic mistakes and C-sections and all that. Like we are facing a pandemic of the microbiome, and we're just now beginning to realize that that's a problem. So I'm reading about that, all kinds of stuff. The specific book that I'm reading on the mindset side, because I'm always trying to read about something in mindset. So right now it's microbiome and then mindset. Is Ray Dalio's book, Principles, which, oh my God, if you haven't read it, that is a must, literally an absolute must. That book is just unbelievably good.
Yeah, no, I think I read the original PDF before he turned it into a book, and I think his communication style of just being fully like high, I don't know what term he uses anymore, but like it's like that high bandwidth, like just tell the truth, like don't hide any, misinterpretations that hurt other people's feelings. I think that was like very interesting to me. Just like it's a very idealistic goal. Like, of course you want to convey your full information, but it's like weird. It's so hard to do. Like there's so many cultural norms that you can't like call someone out directly, or you're awkward about it. I mean, again, I think the reading something and putting it to practice is, I think, the hardest challenge. I'm curious, like, how do you test yourself to put some of these concepts to challenge, to actual practice?
So I'm intoxicated by his book, so I'm moving rapidly on it. So I haven't even finished it yet, and here at Impact Theory, we're already beginning to implement some of the strategies. So it starts with getting everyone together in a group and saying, hey, I'm reading this book. If you want to understand the moves that I'm about to make, you should read it. So have many people in the company now reading it just because they really want to understand my mindset and where I'm coming from. And then finding ways to involve the group in, at a minimum, because he outlines this in the book, no one's going to be like, oh my God, this sounds amazing, let's do it. People get really leery about big cultural change. Right. People get leery about calling each other out in public. So my ask was, I want you guys to give me very direct, very aggressive, very public feedback. So don't pull me aside and say that you have a problem. Just tell me straight up in the group. Obviously, if you feel like for your own reasons, you can't say it in front of the group, then by all means pull me aside. But I want my feedback in front of everybody else. So if you're not happy with something I'm doing, because I need to set the standard for how to respond to that. They need to see me lower my defenses, be open to that criticism, and then make changes based on it. And then now in private, and this is where we are as an organization, so I'm getting my feedback in public, and now in private, I'm giving people like the no holds barred, super direct, like, this is where we are. Let's agree on the truth rather than protecting feelings or anything. Let's agree on the truth, but they have to know that I'm coming from a good place, which came from talking about principles, why I think it's so important to say the hard things, to really have the direct conversation, make sure everybody's bought in on the growth mindset, on self-improvement, that if you don't hear the hard things from outside, because you're never going to be able to see it yourself, if you don't hear it from the outside, then you're never going to be able to make the changes. And so that's what we're doing in our group. And I'll just believe Ray. He said that 30% of the world can't handle it and you're going to lose them. So I'm very open to that because look, at the end of the day, nothing has bitten me in the ass more than people either feeling like I'm moving chess pieces on a board because I'm trying to help them get somewhere without ruffling their feathers, or them not buying into the fact that this is how we do it. Like, we're going to be direct. We're going to be upfront. I'm not trying to be a dick. I just want you to really, and I want to know, right? I want the feedback. So if you can create that environment, yes, you may have attrition of some people that just cannot hang with that. But I really do believe, you want to talk about something that came through just high fidelity for me. Like, I believe on the other side of that, an organization that can really acknowledge who's good at what, who's got believability where, and then just say the hard things. I think on the other side of that is real efficiency. And I am a psycho, Jeff, about efficiency. That's one thing. Wow. Like, if you really want to achieve, like, you've got to get deadly efficient.
Cool. And then, just, how, I want to, we want to be respectful of your time here. What other interesting biohacks are you working on or experimenting with at this point? And what are some of the most exciting projects that you're hoping to release soon? I mean, you mentioned health theory as a new project you're spinning up. So yeah, where else, what should we all be following and that you're working on?
So right now, it's all about creating the intellectual property. I am obsessively focused on actually building the studio. So the last thing I want to do is be talking about the studio, but all you ever see is social content. So I feel like we're doing that well. Our community is growing and very rapidly. So that's great. But now I want to put out the comic books. I want to be making real strides in terms of getting TV shows, films actually out there and produced. So that's my obsessive focus, and honestly takes up about 70% of my time and energy. So right now what's visible to the world is the social content, but that really is relegated to a relatively small part of what I spend my day on. So we've got 2 comic books right now that are in contract negotiations. One of them is with somebody who is just incredibly famous that we would be placing as a central character. If we can pull that off, that would be incredible. So hopefully very soon we'll be able to make an announcement who we're partnering with to get that done. That would just be amazing. We've partnered with a major Hollywood management company, so I'm really excited about that to package up some of our projects. So more to come on both those fronts. Not at a point yet where I can name anything, just because there's a very famous British saying, many a slip between cup and lip. So until
it's signed, I have to understand.
So, but getting close on those, and yeah, I'm really excited about that. So, but keep your eyes peeled for comics. That'll be phase 1.
Okay, cool. And then in terms of personal biohacks, and I know we talked about a little bit about keto, a little about cycling, periodizing keto and low fat and higher protein. Anything else that you've been playing around with? Like, I think I was recently talking to folks that were experts in hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I'm curious, in terms of in the same goals of maximizing efficiency, what else has worked for you beyond the stuff that we already talked about?
So yeah, unfortunately, the thing that I'm really doing is fasting for me personally. That's huge, and I play around with that a lot. And then with my wife, it's all about microbiome. So we've been working with a company very closely. It's run by a friend of mine called Viome, and working with them, the level of testing that they do on your, they test not only the bacteria, they test viruses, fungus, and they're testing RNA. So what's the actual expression of the genes, which is really interesting. So we can really dial in exactly what's going on. So yeah, biohacking our way around SIBO has been our most recent endeavor along those lines, which is just been bizarrely all-consuming. But it seems like we're really making progress there. Honestly, like I'm not a big biohack guy. So my thing is pretty meat and potatoes. Get sleep, eat right, and I mean, look, that's a whole universe unto itself, admittedly.
Yeah.
And then exercise. And if you're doing those 3 things and you're protecting your microbiome, like, man, those are big wins.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Tom.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me on.
That was a fun conversation with Tom. Super energetic, passionate, interesting character. I mean, just his story of making his own Quest nutrition bars in the kitchen, packing up 3 bars at a time. Really resonated with our story at Human, where we were hustling right in the beginning, experimenting with our own handmade nootropics and all of that. So awesome to see him build $1 billion business and then migrate on to, uh, really affecting culture change, which I think is something again that we're really interested in doing at Human. Um, so, check out his content. He's on Twitter. You can check out Impact Theory. I've seen a few of his different programs and shows, and they're interesting. I mean, he's a high energy guy, brings on good guests. So another program that I recommend. Until next time, we'll see you then. Of course, anytime, leave us questions, comments, and also guests that you'd like to see on the show. Uh, and then if you like this program, please subscribe and give us good ratings and comments. Zil, our producer, would appreciate them. I would appreciate them. Find us on Apple iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, YouTube. Thank you.